in the way of insight. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, you just heard it. You have all been invited to a feast. And one of my favorite parts of this invitation in Proverbs chapter 9 is how it's addressed. To those who are simple and to those who have no sense. It's kind of an ironic invitation, I think, for a book that's about wisdom and that is supposed to nurture wisdom and to people who will become wise, that the invitation doesn't seem very wise if you want people to actually show up. To the simpletons and to those who, my Aunt Judy would say, don't have the sense God gave a mule, you're invited to this particular party. This party where in this wondrous house with this magnificent table with more going on, with more offered for us than we can even yet conceive, not any of us. This verse we just heard from Proverbs 9 actually gives us a snapshot of a larger invitation. Proverbs 9 is a part of a 9-chapter opening to Proverbs. When we think about Proverbs, we often think of those wisdom sayings, those little sayings. But actually the first 9 chapters are all about wisdom, about why you should be seeking wisdom, about what wisdom is, about how we gain it, about what it's all about. And this is often intriguing to consider, the nature of wisdom. And so earlier this week, some of you were watching on Facebook, and I invited some of you, and you did, to respond with little definitions about what you believe wisdom is or where you believe that you have seen wisdom, and I loved the feedback. One minister friend wrote, "Wisdom is knowing what moment calls for which virtue and how the virtues interrelate." Another wrote, "Speaking words of clarity and discernment when the way is cloudy and difficult." And still another minister friend, and he didn't write it like this, but I've got to drop the G's, which is, really difficult for me. He said, "My uncle used to always point out that there was book learning and life learning, and a wise person who is someone who has both." That seems about right. Laurie Sutton, are you here? Laurie wrote on my Facebook page, "Wisdom is knowing it's not all about us, it's how we can love and serve others that matters," which sounds an awful lot like Proverbs and Jesus. Andrew Riley said, "Wisdom is the quiet confidence of knowing what the textbooks can't teach you." And recent William Jewell graduate, he's now at Princeton Seminary, Cameron Hewitt, recalled the Serenity Prayer, saying, "Knowing the difference between the things that you can and cannot change is a powerful demonstration of wisdom." Andrew Nash said, "Intelligence is knowing the weight, trajectory, and momentum of a swinging wrecking ball, and wisdom is moving out of the way." And still another friend offered this favorite quote, "Intelligence is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing not to put tomatoes in a fruit salad." And to that which I say, to each their own. If you like ketchup on your strawberries, who am I to judge? Who am I to judge? One woman we know said, "Wisdom is knowing your wife is always right and telling her so, and since I'm married to that woman, I have to say she's right." From a certain point of view. Which also reminds me that another friend said, "Wisdom is knowing what to say, when to say it, and when not to say it." Some of us are wiser than others. And then Jim Knoll demonstrated this when he said, "Wisdom comes from a lifetime of seeing and hearing and reading, as well as doing things that have taught us what failing is and how to move forward from it," which I think is just beautiful, and Jim's life really sums that up, as do so many that you know and named. And so I wonder, even in this moment, how would you define wisdom? It's certainly about more than age and aging. Age and experiences are necessary resources for wisdom, but how many of you have known someone that has aged or that is on up in aging and they just don't seem too wise? You can also have knowledge and not have wisdom. We've all witnessed that too. Wisdom comes from what you do with that knowledge, how you process it, those experiences that you have, especially those experiences that we would never have prayed for. Wisdom is more about know-how than it is about knowing, and the right kind of know-how tends to come when we approach life with curiosity and humility, presence, and growing self-awareness. All this is needed to cultivate wisdom. I recently read an article in Psychology Today that echoed this, where the author was taking research that he'd done in the area of wisdom and people he'd known and things he'd read and trying to synthesize those all into, I think it was about 11 traits. He writes this: 1, wisdom can't be acquired simply through reading books. Knowledge is one thing, wisdom is another. 2, wise people continue to doubt themselves, and that's part of what makes them wise. 3, wisdom is positively related to happiness. Wisdom is positively related to happiness. That ought to get our attention. Wisdom, 4, must be distinguished from mere cleverness. Mere cleverness often poses as wisdom, but isn't. Number 5, wise people, this one's really important, I think. Wise people talk less, are silent more, and listen more than those lacking wisdom. Number 6, wisdom is a function of time and experience, which we've already said are prerequisites for it. Number 7, wisdom comes more from mistakes and failures than from our successes. Number 8, wisdom usually has as its antonym folly or foolishness, but not always. Number 9, wisdom is antithetical to fear. In fact, wisdom is what enables a person often to overcome fear. Number 10, wise people are also humble people. There's really no such thing as someone who is both arrogant and wise. And number 11, wisdom at its best breeds kindness and compassion. These are premier fruits. We so often know wisdom not by its facts but by its fruits, right? We see the flowering seeds of wisdom in things like these questions from Henry Nouwen when he asked, "Did I offer peace today? Did I bring a smile to someone's face today? Did I say words of healing? Did I let go of my anger and resentment? Did I forgive? Did I love?" These are the real questions. I must trust that the little bit of love that I sow now will bear much fruit here in this world and in the life to come. So that how we treat our neighbor is 100% interconnected with whether or not our lives are moving into the neighborhood of wisdom. And if you don't believe me, just believe Jesus, the wisdom teacher who offered both in his invitations and his warnings this idea that how we relate to our neighbor, especially those who are struggling most, is related to wisdom and how we treat him. In fact, how we treat our neighbor, he says, is how you are treating me. One wisdom story that I think captures this really well is the story of a monastery that had fallen on hard times. It was once a great order in which it was flourishing and people were coming there and all kinds of things, wonderful things were going on in it and from it. But because of religious persecution, it had become decimated and it was really down to only about 5 monks. The abbot and 4 other monks that were over 70 there with him, over 70 years old. Deep in the woods, though, surrounding the monastery was a little hut where a rabbi would sometimes come to retreat. And one day it occurred to the abbot that he ought to visit the wise old rabbi and see if the rabbi could offer him any advice that might save the monastery. The rabbi welcomed him, And they began to commiserate together about how the Spirit had gone out from the people and that almost nobody comes to the synagogue or knows about it really anymore. So the old rabbi and the abbot wept together, and they spoke quietly of deep, wise things together. But then when the abbot left, they hugged and embraced. It was a wonderful time. And he said, it's been wonderful being with you, but I actually have failed to do the thing I came here to do, which to see if you have any piece of advice that might save our monastery. To which the rabbi replied, No, I really don't. But before you leave, I just have one thing to tell you, and that is that the Messiah is one of you. The Messiah is one of you. Well, when the monks heard this, when the abbot relayed the rabbi's words, they were really wrestling with this, and they wondered what or who he might mean. The Messiah is one of us, they said. One of us here at the monastery? Who could that be? Do you suppose he means the abbot? Probably he does mean the abbot. The abbot has been here the longest and is so wise. Or maybe he might mean Brother Thomas. Brother Thomas is so holy after all. He certainly could have been the one that he's talking about. Surely he didn't mean Brother Elrod. I mean, Brother Elrod's so crotchety. He couldn't be the Messiah. But then again, Brother Elrod is wise. So maybe it is him. Or maybe it could be Brother Philip. But probably not, because he's always so passive. But then again, he magically seems to show up whenever there's trouble or whenever you need him. I know he didn't mean me, they each say. But what if he did? Surely God couldn't need or love me that much, could God? As they contemplated this, the old monks then began day after day to treat one another with more and more extraordinary amounts of respect, on the off chance that one of them might be the Messiah. And on the off chance that each monk themselves might be the Messiah, they began to treat themselves with more respect too. And now, because the monastery was in this beautiful forest where people would often go for picnics and family walks and things like this, they would often come upon this old, dilapidated chapel. And as it went on and people would come in, over time, they began to sense the aura of the extraordinary amount of respect that surrounded and passed between these monks, permeating the atmosphere there. So they began to come more frequently, and it was such an experience that they began to bring more of their friends, and their friends would bring their friends, and then sometimes there were these young men who would come and say, I feel called, how could I join this order? Then one after another, and after a few years, the monastery became once again thriving, a vibrant community of light and love. How might we continue to become a vibrant community of light and love here in Liberty? By treating every single person in here and out there, including ourselves, as if they might be the Messiah. And doing so as if our life might depend on it. Because in many ways, it does. In so many ways, how we choose to treat others is our future. How we choose to treat others is our future. Wisdom says that the true quality and character of our lives is in how we treat others, especially the least of these, because how we treat people is the fruit of who we are and the fruit of who we are becoming. Another wise rabbi asked his students, "At what point during the dawn of each day can you tell the light from the darkness?" Well, one student replied, "It's the moment when I can tell a goat from a donkey." The rabbi said, "No." Well, then another said, "It's when I can tell a palm tree from a fig tree." "No," the rabbi replied. Well, then what's the answer? His students pressed. "Only when you look into the face of every man and every woman and see your brother and sister," said the rabbi. Only then have you seen the light. All else is darkness. All else is darkness. Friends, wisdom, as the proverb says, is crying out to each and every one of us, inviting us to wisdom's table. For this is the table where light becomes distinguishable from darkness. This is the table where the life